time of your time, I want to get right to speakers. We actually have an additional speaker at the beginning here, and I want to ask Ann Summers from Healthy Oregon to make the introduction for others.
Hi, Ann Summers. I have a tremendous privilege these last several weeks to work with Dr. on creating this segue that we so much need on the topic of wellness between the university and the rich resources of the university and the community, which also is full of rich resources. And we need to make a connection in health and wellness where the head is connected to the body, right, in the way that we treat ourselves, and also in the way that the community is connected with the university. So, I have an absolutely wonderful person that I would like to introduce to you. We have an introductory speaker, Lou Raja, and Lou Raja has a 2,000 student school in the Congo that he supports with a nonprofit that he has in Portland, and it's called Edu Congo. And he sees to the well-being of the students in a much bigger and fuller way than we generally do in our schools here. And he also has a wonderful experience with the African Health Coalition, African American Health Coalition, and so he's a wonderful person to help us build that bridge, which will take some time to build in wellness for our communities with the participation of the university. So, may I ask you to come up, Lou, and please join me, all of us, in welcoming you.
Thank you, Ann, for this wonderful introduction. Jambo. All right, let's do it in English. Good evening. My full name is Lukusa Badibanga Rajake François Benjamin Fariala Benoit Lou, but Lou for short, and no quizzes at the end either. So it's truly an honor and a privilege to share a few words, share a few stories about our experiences, but more importantly, link it to this community and this great research and the great work that Dr. John Ratey is doing, and I look forward to actually hearing more about it. This is one of those presentations where I'm actually anxious to get off the stage and listen to Dr. John Ratey, so it's actually going to be nice, sweet, and short. I want to thank Ann for inviting me. More importantly, I want to thank her for her vision, transforming toward a culture of wellness, one community at a time. That is a daunting task. You are a visionary, you are an influencer, and you are a strategic thinker. And I think it would take all of us to make that happen. Back home we say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And that means every single person in this room, every teacher, every researcher, every community member, every parent, every educator has to be involved for us to have success. Healthy in Oregon, I would love it to be healthy in Washington, healthy in Nevada, healthy in Virginia, healthy in the Congo, healthy in Africa, healthy world. I come from a place where the average lifespan is about 47 years old. And reality is, being alive, just standing upright, is a gift, is a privilege for us. And here, life expectancy is almost double of what we experience. However, the quality of life, some would say, is becoming even more challenging. Are we prolonging life? Are we prolonging death? Which of the two? I want to share a little bit about an African concept. It's called Ubuntu. It's a Zulu word from South Africa, and it means humanity, the essence of being human. And in the words of Desmond Tutu, my humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be humans together. The idea is that all of the folks that we know can benefit from the work that Healthy in Oregon is doing, from the work that Dr. Ratey is doing. These are our children. We are because they are because we are. That unbreakable umbilical cord that ties us all as human beings has to be at play if we are to make a true difference. In other words, it's not us helping them, it's rather us helping ourselves. I have a 3.5-year-old, and he gets fidgety. And every time we exercise, he's calmer and nicer in the evening. So I know that exercise does work, and it connects and actually helps our little one, Yenga is his name, 3.5 years old, be a lot more engaged, a lot more calmer, and also interested in all the work that we do every night to make him a star, to make him a better person than we are. And so I really, really appreciate the work that you do. The school that we built in the Democratic Republic of Congo is there to serve underprivileged children. Over 7 million kids in the Congo do not have the chance to go to school. Over 7 million. Because either parents cannot afford it, or they don't see the value in education. And as a result, these kids are wandering the streets. Some, as you've heard, have become child soldiers. Others are engaged in any other behavior that will definitely not qualify as a good life. Reality is, these are our children. So when we started the school in 2002, we had 198 boys and girls show up. Linking it to the work of Dr. Ratey, one of our sponsors, Dr. John Medina up in Seattle, who wrote the book Brain Rules, encouraged us to make sure that at our school we had a court, a playground for kids, and the importance of physical activity and exercise. Now, mind you, life in the Congo is exercise enough. Life in the Congo is exercise enough, but we had to take it a step further, just to make sure that these kids were primed to receive knowledge and actually be able to go far beyond just the basic writing, reading, and arithmetic, but actually being able to compete in today's globalized world that seems to be going faster and faster and leaving a lot of people behind. And so we also started a clinic because we noticed just a few months into our school that kids were facing a lot of health challenges. And as a result, it was hindering their education. Kids will miss school because of a flesh wound, because of malaria, because of any other thing you can think of. And so we started a clinic. And this is the part that got me excited. The community owned our project. We went to the community and said, these are our children, and they're missing school, and they're not performing at the highest level. What can we do? When you let the people you're serving help you, help them, you have a higher chance for success. So community involvement with a school like University of Oregon is critical. Now, we originally started it for the kids, but guess what? Now their parents, community members are actually using the clinic for their own needs. And they took it in a place we never even intended. But that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of working together in collaboration, and that's the true spirit of what we call Ubuntu. That's the true spirit of taking communal activity versus individual, right? And so, a funny story about kids in the Congo and linking them to kids here. I was reading and actually watching a few videos, the work of Dr. John Ratey, and seeing these kids who were in alternative schools and not doing too well. And they brought in a few treadmills at the school as an experiment after reading his book, Spark. And the result was overwhelming. And I laugh simply because we saw it in the Congo as well, 30,000 miles on the other side of the Atlantic. The same results, same issues, and same solution. In other words, Ubuntu is well alive, not only here, but also in the yet-to-be Democratic Republic of Congo, my home. Now, when I came to the United States, I joined the African American Health Coalition, a great nonprofit organization out in Portland with one mission: reduce health disparities. African Americans continue to die at a higher rate when it comes to preventable diseases, dying 7 years younger than the average American. Obesity, the top. Diabetes, top. Infant mortality, top. Cardiovascular disease, top. Prostate cancer, top. You name it. And so how do you change people's minds about their own well-being? We got two major federal grants, one from the NIH and one from CDC, and we build culturally specific curriculums, and I would go to Northeast Portland to do trainings, and meet people where they are. Ladies and gentlemen, they did not care about the information. Knowledge is great, but if it's not applied, it's useless. I had to meet them where they were. Here I was with all kinds of great knowledge, great research. We worked with PSU, the CDC, the NIH, and I met people who were dealing with drug problems, poverty, you name it. And they could care less about the information I brought. And like them, I put it on the shelf. And I had to meet them where they were. In other words, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And when you're talking about a community and transforming towards a culture of wellness, they have to be involved. They have to be the one that leads you. And they needed me to show that first, I cared. We can have the best research, we can have the best proven model, we can have benchmark after benchmark, reports after reports, and still see diabetes go to the top, still see obesity go to the top. Why? So changing and meeting people first, human to human, connecting first, making them understand that it matters, they matters. Only then did we start seeing, after a couple years, the engagement that we wanted since day one. So our approach failed the first 2 years because we thought it was a no-brainer. You're dying, here's the cure. It should be a no-brainer, but it's not. It's not. So the same with research, the same with the work that we do. First convincing, first connecting, then prescribing. And that's a big lesson that we learned here, and that's also a lesson that we learned in the yet-to-be Democratic Republic of Congo. Ownership. People first, answers later. And so, as I wrap up, because I'm so excited about listening to this guy, I want to say two things about a call to action. In Africa, we say, let's take care of our children, for they have a long way to go. Let's take care of our elders, for they have come a long way. Let's take care of all in-betweens, for we have to do all the work. Now, that's a challenge. That's a direct challenge, because you and I actually do have to do all of the work. It's not enough to listen to this kind of dedication, knowledge, information, research, and not apply it, and not go door to door, and not move this community, not just U of O, but the larger Eugene community, and then grow from there. It would take all of us. Sometimes in academia, we can get excited just about knowledge. Oh, we learned a lot of cool things today. Just going to walk out and be smarter. What does that do? What does that translate to? The investment of his work should not just show up as increased knowledge for all of us. It should show up as applied knowledge. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a direct challenge to myself, and it's a direct challenge to you. Action, the need definitely outweighs our efforts, and we know that. Therefore, it's going to take every single ounce of our energies. Just like back home, we see a school that has 2,034 kids, and yet we look outside, we see 7 million waiting. No time to pat ourselves on the back and say, look how much progress we've made. Because when we look outside, there are 7 million kids that are saying, am I next? What about me? And the same is true here with transforming towards a culture of wellness. So I will ask in the spirit of Ubuntu to put ourselves in the shoes of our children that need us the most, even adults that need us the most, and understand that we're not helping them, but instead we're helping ourselves. Thank you.
Dr. John Ratey, I'm going to take a few moments here while we do some technical maneuvers to get the microphone swapped. To let you know that Dr. Ratey here today was a combined effort between ourselves within the university and the Healthy Youth Performance Big Idea, the Healthy Campus Initiative, which is another project that's ongoing at the university in the Office of Student Affairs, and Healthy in Oregon is led by Summers. So we've been working together for several months now, and the idea behind it has been ongoing for almost a year. And so it's nice to see it come to fruition and to see so many of you coming out to hear our speakers tonight. So our next speaker is Dr. John Ratey, who really needs no introduction. He's trained as a psychiatrist and works out of Harvard Medical School and treats and assesses and diagnoses patients as part of his clinical duties. But then probably more importantly from our perspective is the author of several books, including Spark, which looks at the connection between physical exercise and the effects that it can have on brain function and mental health, and how you can implement these sorts of connections in various types of settings, including public education settings. And so without taking up any more time, I'd like to have us welcome Dr. John Ratey.
Thank you. Thank you. I haven't done anything yet. Anyway, yes, thank you. It's good to be in Oregon again. It's the first time in Eugene. but I hear you're even nicer than the people in Portland. That's what they told me in Portland, I'll tell you, because I couldn't believe how nice the people in Portland were, being from the East Coast. But no, it's an honor to be here, and thank you all for having me. But I've been on a mission for the past 4 years to try and transform the schools. We were talking earlier, Lou, I'll just call you Lou for short, and I were talking about how do you get the culture to change. Well, I've been trying, working at it, because my book is written for adults as well as children, but the only way we can really change the culture is to get to the kids. And this is the problem that we have, because it's so hard to change anybody's mind about anything and to get them to change their habits, but the kids, I think, are really the major focus. Louder? Okay. Louder. 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 Okay. We're there. How's that? Okay. So, I've been working in the area of mental health for now almost 40 years, and teaching at Harvard for almost that long, and have worked in aggression, autism, dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, and all the time being interested in how exercise is one of the components of treatment for all these disorders. But on with the show here. Now, this is my dog. And the dog is a Jack Russell. Does anybody have a Jack Russell in the crowd? 1, 2, couple, 3. Well, one thing you should know about Jack Russells, and those of you who have them know, is that they all have attention deficit disorder. And this little guy was no different. So when we got him home, took him to the vet, and the vet said, got to put him on Ritalin. Instead of doing that, we started an exercise program, and it seems to work most of the time. Well, and then there came the issue of his name. So one of the things that we know, and we know from studies, is that when after you're exercising, even during your exercising, you're going to come up with some pretty good ideas. You know, Einstein came up with a theory of relativity while he was riding his bike, it's thought, or it's said. So I went out for a 3-mile run to come up with a name for the dog. I came back, and I called him Jack. So you know that it works. Now, just to parallel with what you all are doing, we're doing the same thing at Harvard. This is a picture of the opening of our health and wellness initiative at Harvard University. Up there on stage is the president on our left, Drew Faust, who is fully behind what we're doing, and it's a program we call Harvard on the Move. It's eventually to get as many Harvard students, graduate students, faculty running. Eventually, hopefully, to get them to run a half marathon before next year's Boston Marathon, or to run a 5K or a 10K, or to walk it. But to get people, get the kids, get the faculty, and the community moving. And so we have this effort that we just started 2 months ago, and it's taken off. And on stage there with me is Daniel Lieberman, who's a professor of the chairman of the Department of Evolutionary Biology, who's revolutionized the shoe industry. Has anybody seen the Vibram shoes, those shoes that look like socks, people running around in them? Well, that's the guy who did it in terms of the science. He put a paper in Nature a year ago that said, hey, we should be running on flat shoes. We shouldn't be having these heavy shoes if we're running marathons. We're ruining our knees and our shoulders, our knees and our hips and our backs we should be running barefoot because that's the way we're constructed, believe it or not. And then the guy beside him is Chris McDougall, who wrote the wonderful book Born to Run, which all of you who are runners probably have and have read. It's a wonderful book about running barefoot, 100 miles barefoot, and myself. And we were together to start a program for the Harvard students to get them moving. And we thought it's very important for Harvard to do it. The president knows that she's bought into the idea and knows the research, that it will help with all the emotional regulation, stress, improve attention, decrease procrastination, all these wonderful and great things that exercise can do, as well as a side effect, make people healthy. And that's the way I look at it, that we really move to keep our brains in shape, and our bodies get the benefit as a welcome side effect. Now, I'm trying to get Jack into Harvard, but there are times when he reverts back to his old ADD ways, very creative, but he's, when he's not running, sometimes he gets into trouble. What can I say? Well, it's not a new idea. The Greeks knew that moving our bodies, being active, exercising was a great way to join together the brain, the mind, the spirit, soul, all were one. It's all together now. And they didn't split things apart as much as we did, and certainly we've been splitting them apart much more in the past 40 years since the development of our wonderful cyber world has put us in our chairs all the time. And so we forgot, and we forget who we are. We forget that we're still hunter-gatherers. It's been at most 10,000 years since all of us were hunter-gatherers. We were running around the plains and the savannas, worrying about where our food was coming from. And it's estimated that on average, we moved 10 to 14 miles a day when we were hunter-gatherers. 10 to 14 miles a day. It's a lot more than 10,000 steps, let me tell you. And 10,000 steps is impossible for most of us to get to. So we're genetically primed because our genes haven't changed all that much. And yes, there's all these epigenetic forces and all that. But our basic script, because we were hunter-gatherers for 500,000 years or so, our basic script is for us to be moving. And we're not. We're sitting. Last year, the CDC came out with a study showing that we boomer Americans are sitting in front of one screen or another for 9.5 hours a day. And this past year, the Kaiser Foundation came out with a study looking at our kids. From 2004 to 2009, the amount of time they're in front of a screen increased from 6 hours a day to 7.5 hours a day in 5 years. And it's getting worse. And because when you're in front of a screen, it's likely you're sitting. And that's a problem. This is the only brain slide, or one of the only brain slides, so don't get too worried. But our brains evolved for us as hunter-gatherers. Our brains grew over that 500,000 to 1 million years or so. From that red strip there, which is the motor strip, so-called, or the motor cortex, forward. We added on the front part of our brains, the the forehead, the place where I banged into the car door yesterday. It wasn't a hockey game, which I wish it was. But it's that part of the brain that grew to make us better movers. We learned to plan, to sequence, to anticipate, to imagine, to evaluate the consequences of moving, because we wanted to be better movers so we could become the evolutionary victors of who we are. And with then we added language in, because it's our speaking centers are up there too. And as we joined them together, we began to think. And we began to hold on to things and have a history and all those great and wonderful things that make us most human. So that we forget this, that our thinking brain is really the internalization of movement. This is one of our great neuroscientists who wrote this about 10 years ago now, that phrase. And even though he's a Yankee fan, he's still a great neuroscientist. You have to forgive people for, where they're born sometimes. But just think of that. We don't think like that. We have this canonization of our brain, of our mind, that is something different, that it doesn't involve with our movement, with moving our bodies, and yet it's so tied into our moving brain. And the big problem is that we are sitting. The big problem is, in the past 40 years, we have a TV, we have the TV clicker, we then had the computer, then we had more stations, then we had the Game Boys, then we had video games, then we have the texting, then we have the, everything else, and we spend our time in front of a box. And we sit, and we sit, and we sit. And this leads to trouble. And this is the trouble we're in, and this is the trouble we're in with our kids in such a big way. Because our kids are coming to school not knowing how to play. We have organizations set up to teach children at the age of 4 how to play. Now, that to some of you, that will be a surprise. To others, it's not. To elementary school teachers, it's not a surprise. Kids don't know how to play interactively. They can sit and play with computers all day and can put them together and everything, but they don't know how to play. It's a tragedy, and it's something that we really didn't foresee, and it's no one's conspiracy. It's not Bill Gates and Cisco and Intel and all that. It's not. No. It's just the way things have occurred. And we're sitting so much. And it's led to this crisis. The crisis that we're in the midst of. Just some statistics that hopefully will freak you out. 37% of our children today are either overweight or obese. These are children in school. 37%. 1 in 5 of our kids coming to kindergarten last year, 1 in 5 were obese, met the criteria for obesity. 20% of our kids start off being obese. So we can blame it on our genes, because when we were hunter-gatherers, we evolved these part of our genes that are called thrifty genes. Genes that propel us to do 2 things in terms of fuel, and fuel being food, and fuel being fat, and enough fuel for us to live on, because we didn't know whether we were going to eat tomorrow. We didn't know whether the antelope was going to, our food was going to run out, or our berry patches were going to run dry, and we'd have to move again, and whether we were going to get it to another food area. So our genes drove us to do 2 things, drive us to do 2 things. 1, eat the highest caloric food that we can find. That's why we like the fat. That's why I like the high carbs. That's why I like the fructose. That's why I like the corn syrup. That's why we like the 5-stackers and all the things that people that are problems with our eating habits. The second thing that these thrifty genes do is they say, look, if you're safe, you have a food supply, if you're warm, store it up, save it. Don't use exercise or don't use unnecessary movements. Okay? So that's why you didn't see hunter-gatherers warming up for the marathon or training or doing triathletes, because they lived that way. They had to. They were always on the move. Now, this study came out in 2006, and it still freaks me out. This is the Journal of Pediatrics, a very good journal in medicine. Study out of the University of Florida. Looks at, just pay attention to the green column there. That represents 18 children who were morbidly obese at the age of 4. The yellow column there represents 24 of their siblings who were normal weight at the age of 4. So their siblings and the kids that were morbidly obese. They followed them throughout their development, and they found that the IQ difference between the normal weight and the morbidly obese kids was 30 points. There was a 30-point difference. Now, this was done by the Department of Medical Genetics, who ran every genetic test they could find that they knew of, threw out any other kind of birth trauma that might account for this higher the lower IQ and the higher body weight. They couldn't find it. Now, 4 years later, those numbers have doubled. That means that the power of the statistical study has doubled, and it still remains the same. The 30-point difference based on being obese. It's a big problem, and it's a problem today. So we're starting off our kids way behind the 8 ball, not only because they're obese and they're going to have all these health problems, but they're not going to be as smart as their peers. And they looked at some of the scans of these kids that were morbidly obese, and they found indications at the age of 8, 9, and 10 of early Alzheimer's disease. Think about it. Now, our lives are ruled by our sedentary ways, by our lifestyle changes. There was a disorder designated about 5 years ago called sedentaryism by the National Institute of Medicine. And under that comes most of the disorders that kill us. The heart disease, hypertension, stroke, congestive heart failure, other kinds of lung problems, diabetes, obesity in general, Alzheimer's disease. And many of the cancers are caused by or contributed to by our sedentary lifestyle. And I've been interested in the disorders on your right up there, the psychiatric problems, and all of them are going through the roof. We're seeing increases in depression. Depression is going to be the #1 disease in the world by 2015. The #1 disorder that's going to cause a decrease in our functioning, depression. ADHD, we all know that that's been increasing in diagnosis. Anxiety, 30% of our kids are said to have generalized anxiety disorder. 30% in increase. The addictions are rampant. All this, and then we get into Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline, which I'll talk about. But they are all increased in large part because we're sitting. We're sitting all the time. Now, this is, we were talking earlier, Lou and I, about why don't people grab on to the message? Why don't they just hear that it's better for you to be fit than not fit? They're not afraid of diabetes. They're not afraid of obesity. They're not afraid of heart disease. They're not afraid of anything anymore because we get pills for it or we will. But what we are afraid of is losing our minds and developing Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. We're still afraid of that, and I like to freak people out about it because it's helpful. No, it is. It's helpful. It's helpful to get people to move because we know so much. Now, this is just a random sample of adults that they gathered together, divided them in 3 categories: obese, overweight, and normal weight, 77-year-olds. And they took pictures of their brains. And this is the grouping of them. And the yellows and orange spots there are areas of the brain in the group of obese adults whose brains had shrunk. So they had 9% less brain volume than the normal weight 77-year-olds. And a 77-year-old brain looked like it was 95. Okay? Just based on the obesity. And that was the only thing that differentiated this group. If you were overweight, you had 4% less brain volume than the normal weight 77-year-old. And it's hard and important as we age, we tend to put on those pounds and keep them on, and it's harder to get off. Then we're met by this scourge that goes along with being overweight, diabetes, right? We were talking earlier, John and I were talking about our early days in medicine. When we would see somebody with diabetes type 2, we'd want to follow them because they were interesting patients to us. We didn't see them that often. So we wanted to always learn about people that disorders that we didn't see that often. Now it's so rampant, you can't even believe it. The pharmacists can tell you how to treat it now, and we have other drugs, and it's great and all that, but we didn't see it that much. It certainly was there, but we didn't see it like we do now. And it's just expected. Oh, you're 55, you're going to be diabetic. And now we know the chilling fact that if you have diabetes, you're much more likely to have early cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. In fact, there are some Alzheimer's centers that call Alzheimer's disease diabetes type 3. It's that connected with metabolic syndrome and your nutrients being out of control, overwhelming the nerve cells to cause early nerve cell death and decline. So what's the answer? Everybody wants to know, how much should we exercise? Well, this guy's not doing it, but that's sort of the way we think. What happened? There was a big revolution, really, in neuroscience in the 90s. Well, I mean, it started, really, in the 90s, but then there was this big study that came out early in the 90s looking at what were the factors that prevented the onset of Alzheimer's disease? And there were 3. Ideal weight, low caloric intake, ideal weight. Continuous learning. So everybody connects to Sudoku and crossword puzzles and playing Jeopardy and doing all those things and brain games and all that. And the 3rd was exercise. And exercise by far was the most important one, had the biggest effect. Even more so than when the one took into account the reduction in blood pressure, the reduction in stroke risk, the improvement in cardiovascular flow, all that. If you factored that out, exercise was still a very important factor in preventing the onset of cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease. Such that we know if you're middle-aged now and you're sedentary, but you begin to exercise 3 to 4 times a week for 40 minutes and do it at a moderate rate, moderately intense rate, which means sweating, you can push back cognitive decline by anywhere from 10 to 15 years. Some centers, same criteria, say that you can cut your chance of developing Alzheimer's disease itself in half just by beginning to exercise. Now, other studies not so much, but it's at least one is found that. But it certainly has an effect. It certainly does. And so one of the authors of the study said, well, what the heck's going on? You know, and we were just learning, we were unlocking the secrets of the brain. We didn't know much about the brain back then. So he did this study. He took a bunch of mice, taught them how to run in a hamster wheel, and did the mice SATs beginning an 8-week period, and taught the mice how to run. They ran in these hamster wheels for 4 kilometers a night. They're nighttime animals. 4 kilometers a night on their own after he taught them how to run. They repeated the SATs. Their SAT scores went up 20%. 20% rise in their SAT scores. Then they looked at their brains. Their brains were thicker. They were better connected. Their cortexes were more involved with one another, and parts of their brain were bigger than they had been before, because they then also looked at a comparison group of their brothers and sisters who weren't running. About 10 years before that, we had identified this little number called Bdnf. It was something that we had no idea about when I was in medical school, and didn't really until the 90s we know about it. And that's a substance called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and it is growth factor for the brain cells. And it's made when each of our brain cells work, when they beat, when they fire. We make more of this stuff. It's sort of God's gift to us because it acts like fertilizer. And I labeled it Miracle Grow for the brain back then. And it sort of stuck because it does that. It does everything fertilizer does. It helps our brain cells stay alive, helps them grow, helps them do their job right. It also, now we know, it's an antidepressant. It's useful for anxiety. It's useful for the addictions. It's a useful little critter. And the biotech industry went crazy over this since these studies started to come out. And tried to find a way to increase this BDNF. How do we do it? What drugs do we use? What genes can we manipulate? Well, we haven't found the genes to manipulate yet. We can't do it quite yet. The drugs we know, there's a bunch of them, but nothing does it better in terms of increasing it, the amount of this fertilizer, than exercise. And then these mice, the percent of increase was 200 to 400% increase in this BDNF, or Miracle Grow for the brain, in the running mice, connected with their improvement in their scores, as well as an improvement in their brain health. Their brains grew. Now, also, we've known since Hippocrates that exercise was useful to treat mood problems, to treat depression. And this is a summary of a study, of many studies done at Duke University Medical School over the 80s and 90s, and many, many other universities throughout the world, because the study before, this little guy, the mouse that roared, 1995, it started an avalanche of studies on exercise in the brain. Before that period, before this study really, there might have been 8 to 10 studies a month on exercise in the brain. Now I get sent 40 new abstracts a week on exercise in the brain. It's done all over the world. People are looking at it. People are, looking at finer parts of it, the genes that are turned on, not turned on, how much affecting this, stress hormone, all those kinds of studies are coming in all the time because people are interested in it, because it's one of the major ways to affect the brain. And mood, we knew about. It affected mood. And this study from Duke shows that. Basically, they took 100 depressed people who came into Duke, were moderately depressed, and said, be in our study. And they said, sure. So they put a third, and all of them were sedentary. No one was exercising. So they put a third into an exercise group where they went on the treadmill and they exercised 4 times a week for 40 minutes, getting up to about 75% of their maximum heart rate. And then another third they put on medicine, increasing doses of Zoloft. And another third of that group they put on both Zoloft and exercising. At the end of 2 weeks, their depressive scores all dropped to the same level. And at the end of 4 months, it remained dropped. That is, they all, many of them improved and got completely undepressed. So exercise was as good as our antidepressants. Now, this study has been repeated numerous times by investigators all over the world trying to find out how much do I have to do? Because the question that you all want to usually get asked immediately is, what's the least amount of exercise I can do? First question. It always happens. And so people want to know, well, what is the minimum I have to do? I would say, just don't watch The Biggest Loser. Do your exercise, or Dancing with the Stars, or whatever the heck it is. Do the dance for an hour. Do your own dance for an hour. Much better, much better. And then that's the answer. People say, oh, I don't have time. Oh, yeah, I have to watch Survivor, then Lost, then Biggest Loser, then whatever. Or I have to get online and answer that email. Somebody might have written, it might be important. That's the way our lives are. We're driven by our media. And I mean, I'm not saying I don't do it. I'll be walking along. I didn't walk into a poll looking at my iPhone, but I could have. But anyway, we've known over and over and over again that exercise helps with mood regulation, with anxiety regulation. But I'm talking tonight really about how exercise affects so many things, and one of them is this Bdnf. And we know now, we have a whole new theory about depression in the past 7 or 8 years, that it's not about having too little serotonin or too little norepinephrine, which we thought for years. It's about our brains sort of not being plastic, not being awake, not being useful. When you're depressed, it sort of goes offline. And one of the things that goes offline is this Bdnf, it drops. And one of the ways of increasing Bdnf is to take antidepressants or to get yourself exercising. So we know that it's a very useful antidepressant. Now, this front area of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that's the last area of the brain that gets that's evolved and makes us most human. It's an area of the brain that my work in ADD for years has been interested in, because that's the area of the brain that seems to be a little bit sleepy in our ADD kids and adults. It turns off. It doesn't quite stay on as much as it needs to stay on. We've always said it should be called attention variability disorder as opposed to a deficit disorder, because when an ADD kid or adult get interested, bam, their attention system is fine. Just try to pull an ADD child away from a video game, even though they can't sit still to listen to the teacher for less than 5 seconds. But they can spend 4 hours not moving in front of their video game because it's so compelling. So their attention can get switched on, and this part of the brain is a little bit sleepy with our ADD people, and this is the area that guides our humanity and our thinking, and this is where we have our RAM chip, where we have our working memory, and this is an area that's always turned on with exercise, always. And there's another way we think of exercise. That's Southern California, you know. That's Southern California. But it's true. We think of exercise as something else that we need to do, then we need to program in and, you know, take the escalator up to sweat. But, okay, last slide about aging is that these studies have been done showing that if you begin to exercise adults, and they haven't been exercising at the age, this is one of a group at the age of 69, they looked at them and they gave them the elderly SATs. After 6 months, their SAT scores went up by 11%. And those areas, those blue and yellow areas in their brains, are areas of brain growth, not retraction, not reduction, not erosion. So these 69 to 70-year-olds' brains grew that much because the big change was they began to exercise. We now have this data looking at children. This group of kids who were they were from the same school, the same demographics, and they split them in half. Half were fit, half unfit. Those that were fit did better on some neuropsych testing than the unfit kids. And they looked at their brains and they found that one part of their brain, the hippocampus, was bigger in the fit kids than in the unfit kids. The only difference being that that one was fit, one was unfit. So even at the age, and these were 10-year-olds, at the age of 10, it was already having an effect on brain growth and development. Now there's Jack again, who's much of a player, likes to play quite a lot. And one of the things that I learned as I've been traveling around is about the importance of play that I hadn't put in the book much, and talked about how important play is. And we know a lot about play. Up in Washington State University, there's Jaak Panksepp is one of the world's experts on play and the brain, identifying where the play circuits is and all this kind of stuff. But it's very important. All of our mammals play. They have to play. If they don't, their brains are smaller. They're a little dumber. They're socially different. They don't fit in. They become the bullied or bullies if they don't play. If you withhold play from them, they get something's different. And Stuart Brown wrote a great book called Play, and talking about play's effect on brain development. And it's a very compelling story. And tripped off, I think, by this little vignette that occurred up on the tundra in northern Manitoba, where a man who had a bunch of huskies took with him a photographer out for a week to camp out and take pictures of his huskies. He was really proud of them. So they're up there taking pictures the first night at dusk, and in comes this 1,200-pound male starving polar bear. So they all thought it was dinner time for the polar bear, because they knew the polar bears in that region had been starving because the ice floes hadn't closed and they hadn't got to their seal pups. So they thought it was over, except the first dog that you see there, who was said to be the dumbest of the group, didn't take the cue, but instead got into the universal play position, which is a back bow, tail up, mouth open, fangs covered. Not a threat, not defensive, inviting the bear to play. And this is what happened. The point being here is that it's a built-in response. It's something we need to do for our brains to grow properly, for us to function as mammals, for us to function as part of the family, part of the tribe, part of the pack, part of whatever. We need to play. And this overwhelmed the bear's hunger response, 4 months starving. And he came back every night to play with the dogs, and it generalized to the other pack dogs as well. So we need to be doing that, especially when we need to know this kind of stuff, because what's happening today, we're moving out recess. We're moving out PE out of the classroom, out of the class time, because we have to do what was started, what I called No Child Helped at All, and now we have the... And now we have race to the top of what? Who knows? Because we're ignoring the essential ingredient of helping our learners be better learners. We're ignoring that. Plus, we're removing recess. We're removing PE from the curriculum. And this study represents a study looking at recess. Albert Einstein Medical School looked at it a couple of years ago now, and over a couple of year period looked at 13,000 kids with recess, how important it was, how much was necessary. Well, they found from their data that 30 minutes a day was necessary for recess for the kids in grade 3 and 4. If you didn't have it, the kids were more unruly, more difficult in class. Overall, teachers were less satisfied, et cetera, et cetera. 30 minutes, whether it's packaged as 3 10-minute breaks a day or 2 15-minute breaks a day, it didn't matter. But 30 minutes was necessary, and the more was better, of course. And what they found, too, which was interesting, is that they found that the best recesses were those with the least equipment. So it was dependent on the kids to come up with their own games. And it really speaks to what play is, sort of developing that creative, that interactive, that togetherness aspect of things. What got me turned on to write this book was learning about a school system in Naperville, Illinois, 60 miles west of Chicago, where in 2003, statistics came out that 3% of their children were overweight. The average back then was 33% in the United States. 3% of their kids were overweight. That was one. Two was the reason for it was this incredible PE program that had evolved over 20 years, started by one of their coaches and PE teachers named Phil Lawler, who died last year after doing so much for the whole field. But he involved this PE program where he decided 20 years before that his kids were not getting any fitter, they were getting less fit. So he decided, okay, even though he was a baseball coach and a Cubs fan and all that, he decided that he's going to throw out the balls, which he did, and just focus on fitness. So he had the kids every day, which they did at that time in Illinois and still do. So he had them play running games, had them do calisthenics, had some strength equipment, minor stuff, but he had them moving all the time. And then he had this brilliant idea some years later, a couple years later, because as athletes, the athletically inclined kids were still scoring the best. They were running the fastest, they were being the strongest, they did the most, whatever. And so he put heart rate monitors on the kids. And that equalized everything. So the kids that were geeky, the kids that weren't athletes, the kids that were a little slower, all they had to do was get their heart rate up to cardiac training zone for a certain amount of time, and they could get an A. And this changed everything. Because many of you out there remember gym class or PE as being for the athletes. And those people who already knew how to do things. Well, this made it much more egalitarian, and this started a whole wave of change in their program, and he convinced the high school and then the other high school to the point where they got all 19,000 kids involved in this PE program, which evolved. It wasn't just fitness-based. They brought the sports back in, but it was 2-on-2, 3-on-3. Everybody's playing every day, all period long. Now, what really got me on a plane was also learning that they had lobbied to take the International Science and Math test some years before that, 2 years before I learned about them, which is an international test that's given every 3 years, and all countries take it. The U.S. always scores in the teens somewhere, 11th, 12th, 13th, 15th, something like that in science and math. The schools in Taiwan and Hong Kong and Singapore are always in the top 5 because they focus so much on pushing their kids to really be at the top. And they took it, they lobbied to take it as a country. They came in number 1 in the world in science and number 6 in math. This is a school that spends 45 minutes a day in fitness-based physical education. They take it very seriously. Oh, by the way, for the past 8 years now, it's voted the number 1 subject by the teachers, by the students, and by the parents. The PE teachers are held in high esteem, and it's very unusual. Oh, and they also started winning all the trophies for their various teams about 10 years ago. That's after 15 or so years of the program being developed. All their teams started to win. They got bigger teams. They had more students to choose from. It wasn't, you weren't factored out early. So that's when the banners start showing all over their gymnasiums. So they developed what we call new physical education, which is really the new PE, which is based on play, everybody participating, everybody moving, and not just on who's the best, who has the best shot, what kind of skills are we developing. Skills are important, but fitness, my goodness, is so important today. I get into arguments with some PE teachers who want to hold on to the past, and it's very hard to give it up. As we all know, the past, it holds us, but they argue, well, we got to teach some skills. We got to teach them how to shoot a foul shot. And I say, what if you have students that can't stand up for 30 minutes? You have many of those students that can't do that. And you want to worry about teaching them skills when they're so unfit that they can't even be with you over that period of time. So we started a nonprofit. Oh, sorry. Called Sparking Life. Started with a whole group of us. And we have a website, sparkinglife.org, that is going to hopefully be the repository of new science, new evidence, new schools that we learn about, highlighting them, bringing it out to the world to say, look, This is the science. It's not just something that somebody made up. It's not just the PE teachers lobbying. It's not. This is from all teachers. It's not just something that's in our imagination, but it's real. It's science. And then to look at some of the programs that are already in existence that demonstrate this. And it's something that we have the website. We're beginning to get sponsors. It's interesting. Reebok, Nike, Adidas, New Balance, all the sports companies, and Nike certainly around this area, are worried. They're worried about the future because they're expanding worldwide, and that's really increasing their sales and everything, but they're worried because kids everywhere are sitting and they're not participating. And so in the future, they're not going to have that kind of customer to sell to. They see it. Nike has opened up a whole new division called Access to Sport, just started this year, to try and promulgate, to try and get kids moving again. Reebok has come up, has got me on board to help bring the message to all over the place. Adidas is worried about it as well. All these companies that have a stake in this are starting to say, we have to get these kids moving, and we have to get them to really help us in this fight. And just to show you what the power can be, this is me and the president of Taiwan, President Ma. He read Spark, and he's an ex-triathlete, which helped, and he also went to Harvard Law School, which also helped. But he invited me over to lecture to the universities over there for about a week and a half. But he also decided that the Taiwanese have always been at the top of the rating scales for test taking and everything because they spend so much time studying. The typical day is 7 to 3 in school and then 4 to 8 in a study hall every single night. Yes. But anyway, he read Spark. He thought, oh, this makes all the sense in the world. There's science backing it up. So he decided to move PE classes from 2 hours a week to 3 hours a week in one fell swoop for 43 million total population. And just he could do that because it's a centralized government. It's hard for us to do anything like that because we have 40,000 school districts, and each school district is its own little country. So you just can't legislate something change like that. But he did. And then we have my friend here, Jack, who, when I exercise him, and the way I do it, I take 3 balls out to the backyard, throw one up the hill. He has to run up and get it, and he comes running back down, all excited, would not drop it. They're not taught to drop their quarry, but I have another ball. And that's when he'll drop it, and then I'll throw that up, and he'll go running up. So he goes running up and down the hill and bringing me the ball back repeatedly until he's exhausted. And then when he comes in, though, he's ready to take notes. He's ready to take notes for me, and I call it the Jack effect. Now, we all know about ADD kids and ADD dogs. And this is what can happen when he doesn't get his play. Because one of the things we've known about the effect of exercise on ADD for a long time. And because ADD does the same thing as medicine. it works the same way. And that's his little brother, and no morning walk. Well, yeah. And we know that it improves attention, it improves focus, concentration, decreases foolishness, fidgetiness, and all that. And so we began to take this program that Naperville really initiated into the inner cities. And this is an inner city school in Kansas City, elementary school, 80% of the kids on lunch and breakfast programs, difficult environments. They had PE once a week. Before that, they started PE every day based on the Naperville motto of fitness. So they had running games. They had a few Dance Dance Revolution machines, which is a very powerful aerobic game. They used these heart rate monitors, and they found a tremendous change in the first year. All the rating scales of their fitness ratings went way up, and what really started a whole revolution in Kansas City was that they saw a 63% drop in disciplinary problems across the first year. 63% drop in discipline problems. Then the most fascinating one was a school down in Charleston, South Carolina, again focusing on inner city children who were in a charter school where they had one PE teacher and one gymnasium. No more money was allocated to do this, but all she needed was time. So she begged and pleaded with her principal to let her have the kids every morning for 30 minutes. And she set up the gym, because they had gym once a week or PE once a week, but she set up the gym to have a play, 30, 40 minutes of play every morning. And what she did is she had 8 different stations. One was to play basketball. The second was to do double dutch. The third was to do pogo stick. The fourth was to do cup stacking, which is really an aerobic activity. Then they had some of these Dance Dance Revolution machines. But all she would do was sit up on stage eventually and blow her whistle every 8 minutes, and the kids would switch. So they got in 3 different activities every morning. The first 4 months of instituting this program compared to the year before, they saw an 83% drop in discipline problems. 83% drop. Subsequent drop in days of suspension, an improvement in attendance, a decrease in truancy, and an increase in teacher satisfaction, an increase of kids paying attention, students sitting in the chair, being there. Just amazing. We've known about how exercise affects test scores. In California, since Schwarzenegger was there, he's been doing this Fitnessgram on 1 million kids a year in grades 5, 7, and 9. And basically what is shown every single year since the beginning, the more fit you were, the better your scores were in math and in English or language arts. The more fit kids were, the better they were. Ken Cooper, Dr. Cooper, who invented the Fitnessgram, did a Fitnessgrams on 2.6 million Texas children now a year ago, and looked at their scores, and they saw the same kind of straight line correlation. The more fitness standards you met, the higher your scores on math, science, English, history, on every measure that they could see on their various test scores. A decreasing straight line on aggression, on violence in the classroom, on discipline problems, on truancy, on absenteeism. A straight straight line. And what was remarkable about his study is that this was all independent of gender, race, socioeconomic standards, the school you went to. It did not matter. If you were more fit, you were more likely to be a better student. You were more likely to be there and to participate in the schooling. Now, I want to leave time for questions, and I know we're starting to get close to the witching hour. But this study came out at the end of last year from Sweden that really caps the story. An epidemiologist there looked at 1.2 million boys who were over a 26-year period. They graduate in Sweden from high school at the age of 15, and they enter compulsory military service at the age of 18. When they did a series of tests in both periods. When you graduated from high school and when you entered military service, you were evaluated on your cardiovascular function, or your aerobic function, how fast you could run, what your heart rate was like, all that. And they also evaluated your IQ scores, your cognitive ability, a bunch of tests, and they did it both times. What they found was that if you improved in your aerobic function, if you got more fit in general, your scores went up. And if you stayed the same, your scores stayed the same or they dropped. They followed these kids throughout their development. Those kids that through the age 15 to 18 who improved had a higher academic standing at the end of their career, had a higher socioeconomic standing in their life, and generally were more into what they were doing. Now this remained the same for brothers, for non-identical twins, and for 600 sets of identical twins. So if one identical twin improved on their cardiovascular functions, likely their intellectual function went up. And then should one of the other twin not improve, it was likely that their academic performance did not improve. So there was this direct sort of finding out there that there was a very big association with the fitter you are, the better student you are. Now, I'll just quickly go through some of the science and then stop for questions. What does exercise do? What does it do? Why am I talking about it? Well, exercise it changes the brain chemistry, and it improves the brain in three distinct ways. One is the overall. It improves the brain systems, the attention system, the memory system, the motivational system, the mood regulation system. Two, it improves the environment that our nerve cells are living in, sort of the soup that they're living in, to make it more likely that those cells are going to grow. It improves what we call their neuroplasticity. And that's by far the most important factor in terms of the brain. Well, first, the systems make for a better learner. Put them in the chair, make them more attentive, all of that. The second is make their brain cells more receptive. And the third thing that most people focus on when they talk about exercise and cognition, the third thing that happens is something that we only learned about 10 years ago, that we make new brain cells every day from stem cells. I used to say, despite George Bush, we have stem cells in our brains. We do. And we make new brain cells every day. Well, there's nothing that increases our making new brain cells every day better than physical aerobic exercise. So in 3 ways, we make our learning capacity better by having the child and the adult be more ready, be more aroused, be more alert, improve their attention, improve their ability to take in information and cue it into the brain cells themselves, because we learn nothing unless we grow our brain cells. So, with that, I think I'm going to stop and answer your questions and get into a little dialogue here. So thank you very much. Computer games certainly can be useful to a certain extent, certainly to improve your. I mean, it's just like playing crossword puzzles. It challenges your brain, and your brain loves to be challenged. But we're not talking about the kind of computer games that our kids get addicted to. We're talking about exploring games, or games that challenge us as adults and kids. So yes, they can be. Yes?
Comments on exercise, Alzheimer's, and any relation to reversal of symptoms?
I went by a slide to show the actual reversal of some of the neuropathology of Alzheimer's disease in animals that they gave Alzheimer's to, and then saw it retract with exercise. So it's not like you can chase it away, but you certainly, all the studies show you slow the course. If you start down the path of Alzheimer's disease and you start or begin or stay exercising, you will slow down the progression of the Alzheimer's. But once it's started, it's on its way. Certainly for something like Parkinson's disease, we know a lot about that. It's one of the big disorders that is really sensitive to exercise. Prevention, for instance, just like Alzheimer's per se. Yes? I'll repeat it.
Yeah. New brain cells versus new brain cell connections. Could you talk about the comparison?
Yeah, new brain cells and if they get connected or not. It depends on the person. It may be that the reason why jocks or dumb jocks are there is because they never connect up. You have to feed them. You have to challenge them with new information. They have to be just like any brain cell. They have to be guided. You have to instruct them. And not all new brain cells grow into mature brain cells. So your question is a good one, actually. Yes?
Somewhat corollary to that, what's the research on the type of exercise, aerobic versus resistive, and in conjunction to the concept of play, does it make a difference to mix up the exercise so the brain is learning different types of things as opposed to always being a long-distance runner and doing nothing but running?
You're absolutely right. The more varied, the better. And for instance, we've done studies looking at running for 10 minutes versus running for 10 minutes and having a coordination challenge while you're running. You do much better on your tests if you do the both. If you're running and if your heart rate's up and you're having a coordination challenge at the same time. So yeah, and I like to use Obama as an example. You know, he works out every morning, but he does best when he plays basketball 3 times a week. And it's said that the two debates that he lost to Hillary were the 2 times he couldn't play basketball that day beforehand. Although I'm so disappointed in anyway. But no, and resistance versus aerobic training. Resistance is very good. It does about this. It approaches what you do with aerobic exercise. It's not quite there. Part of the reason is perhaps because it's hard to get rats to lift weights, and the same way with yoga. You know, it's hard to get a rat to do a yoga pose. So we can't really measure stuff as well. But when we look at human scores, they approach what we see in aerobic exercise, but not quite there. For everything, for learning, for mood, for anxiety, all the big ones that we look at. It approaches it, but it's not quite to the level of what we see with aerobic exercise. Yes, you.
In your book, you made a pretty good point about the heart rate really has to get to a fairly significant rate, but when you have the ADD kid or even the obese kid, the ADD kid doesn't want to get his heart rate up that high. The obese kid certainly doesn't.
Well, no, but the obese kids get up their heart rate way up. Think about it. If you're obese and you can't walk to the mailbox without getting your heart rate over 110. No, really. The ADD kids, well, you know, you have to find a way to get them moving, you know, and if you work in play enough with them, you can get them to get their heart rate up.
I'm proud to say that the Eugene School District does do the new PE, and we've been doing it for a while. And the sad part is, however, we're losing a lot of PE teachers this next year. And my question is, what do we do besides keep sending information like you being here tonight and all this information out there to make this community see how important it is?
Well, go on strike. No, I don't know.
It's not legal anymore.
No, I don't know. I mean, it really comes from, you know, we really have to keep our information flowing, and all I can say is we have to know what we're doing, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot because we're putting. I mean, we're sacrificing our children for the future. Come on, it's not just you. It's not just PE teachers. They're talking in Texas, 60 kids in a classroom. What's that going to be like? It's already outrageous in a lot of places, and we're just allocating our resources to who knows what. It's the same issue with the healthcare budget. You know, I mean, why didn't anybody think of health first? You know, I mean, we spend all this money for healthcare, you know, and health would be a better way to look at it, you know, and we never thought like that. It was like anyway. Next question. Yes?
Any thoughts on nutritional supplements, a short list, omega-3s, omega-6, fish oil, that goes on and on?
It doesn't go on and on. You said some of the good ones. I mean, what I say is you really need omega-3s unless you eat enough salmon and we don't eat much tuna anymore, but and swordfish, deep water fish, because we've engineered omega-3s out of our food chain, because we don't have grass-fed animals anymore, and that's why we used to get a lot of omega-3s. We don't have that, so we're all probably deficient in omega-3s sitting in this room unless you take supplements. Many of you, especially up here in Portland, are vitamin D deficient because the sun sometimes comes. But you should have a vitamin D level every year. Those are the two things that we absolutely know. You can talk about vitamin B, yeah, maybe. Vitamin C, yeah, maybe. But we usually get enough of that. But we need multivites. But those two are the prime levels, omega-3s and vitamin D.
Cleveland doesn't
Yes, it was.
Pointed out in one of the studies that long-term exercise plus Zoloft, the Zoloft seems to negate the effect of the exercise.
It may do that, but no. The study was just to emphasize that that exercise itself was as good as Zoloft, or as good as Zoloft and exercise combined. But you're right. I mean, the big problem is that we have gotten so used to looking for an immediate answer, the pill. You know, that's why no one takes responsibility for your own health. And until we instill that in our children, until we demonstrate that, until we show that, until we are that, we become that, we're just going to go down that path, and we're going to wait for the exercise pill, and that'll give us all those benefits, and we're going to wait for this and wait for that, and just continue to watch Lost. Yes.
I'm having trouble finding information about exercise and addictions recovery. Have you done much?
There's a whole chapter in my book on addiction. You don't have to look beyond that. I'm serious. There's a whole chapter on it, and it'll be at least a start. It's very hard to do studies on addicts, especially when you get into the hard drugs, because they tend to go back to their same environment, which then cues them for their addictive substance. But we know a lot about addiction and exercise. There's a book that I participated in that we wrote for the National Institute of Drug Abuse it's coming out soon, that looks at many of addictions and many ways to treat addictions. If you bear with me, I'll show you, bring back a little bit of Jack here. This is one of the addictions today, is the video game addiction, okay? This is an old cartoon, by the way, very old, it's 20-some years old. Well, and people with attention deficit disorder, like Jack, are twice as prone to substance abuse and addiction as others. And so whenever I go away, I make sure Jack is exercised by the dog walker twice a day. And this one Sunday I came back and the dog walker hadn't shown up. Yeah, you over there.
Can you give us any kind of an idea, like 10 minutes worth of the exercise at the proper heart rate produces the learning effect for 20, 30 minutes?
No, I can't give you an idea of, it's a good question. What intensity duration is necessary to raise the brain level to a certain point? I think we know even at 60% of maximum heart rate, which is just walking, raises the activity in the brain and raises test scores by about 10%. Just 20 minutes of walking, not sweating, just walking. There was a Scottish study out 2 weeks ago looking at kids by their desks, running in place or dancing in place for 15 minutes. Of that, they were probably doing it for 10 minutes. They weren't almost sweating, not quite. Middle of the day, after about a half hour after lunch, they tested them at the end of the day. There was a positive effect in every single test score that they looked at. So a short burst, it was 3 hours later. 3 hours later. So there is still some effect, is what I'm saying, just from that intervention. So we're getting there. I mean, you know, we don't have, it's not like Lilly and Merck and all these big drug companies who have lots of money are spending money looking at exercise, you know, and its effect on these kinds of things. So we need to, you know, but we're getting there. It's because it's so important and it's so easy and people see the value in it that it's happening all over the globe. I mean, the Far East is hot about exercise and its effect on the brain, but so is Europe, and so are many, many science centers in the United States now. And it takes money to do studies, but the studies are being done. Yes?
I'm curious about this. The Taiwanese who do so well, how much do they exercise in school?
Well, that's what I was saying. They went up from 2 hours a week to 3 hours a week. His major reason is because they're so under pressure that they, like the South Koreans, the South Koreans have the highest suicide rate in the world amongst adolescents, because there's so much pressure put on them. They have the same kind of day, you know, where everything's about improving your test scores, improving your ability to perform in our world. And 20-some% of the Taiwanese kids were depressed. So a big part of his reason wasn't just to raise test scores, but was to reduce depression. And so that was a big reason why he made the switch to more PE. Way back. Shout it out.
I'm wondering if you could talk about the role of structured like team sports for development in young kids and also for the adults. TVs on the treadmill.
TV on the treadmill? Oh, I know they do. And you know, I think if it keeps people coming, that's fine. It might be a good way to do long distance on the treadmill, but really one should go, if you're going to the gym to exercise, you should go with that in mind. To really focus on your exercise, because exercise means pushing yourself beyond what's comfortable. It's not just walking. That's just activity. If you're not sweating, if you're not challenging yourself, then you're really not hitting the real what exercise is. You should be looking at doing better and better every day, more and more, higher and higher. Bigger challenges, and that should be what you do with your exercise, you know, or play, and when you won't even think about what you're doing, and your idea of team sports. I mean, it's terrific to have the sports that, you know, I played squash for 30 years until I ruined my shoulder, and I never thought about it. It was exercise. It was just fun, you know. It was just fun. And that was the best exercise I could have ever done, because you're moving 45 minutes without even knowing it, and really moving. So, the more you can work in having fun doing it, the more you'll come back doing it, because the biggest problem is sticking with it, as we know. So all that really has to be taken into consideration. We have time for one more question?
I think we'll have to end now because I think the hockey game's almost over.
Oh, okay.